grateful you're here, and I cannot wait for you to get to know my next guest, Dr. Joli Hamilton. She is a research psychologist, best-selling author, TEDx speaker, and an ASECT certified sex educator. Her most recent research considers what romantic jealousy can help us learn about ourselves. She has spent the past 2 decades studying and reimagining what love can be if we open our imaginations to possibility. Joli helps people create partnerships that are custom built for their authentic selves. No more shrinking, pretending, or hiding required. Welcome, Dr. Joli Hamilton. How are you doing?
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Monica. I'm doing great because I'm talking to you. So, and I was so jazzed for this conversation. So I'm great.
Me too. I'm equally as excited. So I just read your professional profile, but what is it that you really want the summit viewers to know about you?
Okay. I'm going to I always bury the headline and so I'm going to not do it this way. I have 7 teenagers and I've always had a business and I got 3 degrees. I'm working on my 4th while raising them. So what I want people to know about me is I get that you feel like you're too busy sometimes to lean into intimacy or to build your relationship. I totally get it. It's worth the investment. It cost me 1 marriage. I had to completely redo it and redesign the second time around so I didn't make the same mistakes. No amount of busy is actually going to get in the way of this if you want it.
Oh, I love that message. Like that hits right here to the core. So I hope that other people are hearing that and going, yes, that is so true. There is nothing worth neglecting that part of your life. So awesome. I love it so much. So for the rest of our time together today, I would love to discuss this idea of a sexual shadow. Like this is kind of unique to you. I don't know. I don't even know what you're going to say here. So what is a sexual shadow and why does it cause so much pain in relationships?
Okay. So I wanted to talk about sexual shadow with you because when we think about sex, most of us want to move toward pleasure. And that's great. I am all for pleasure centered education and therapy and coaching. It's all great. And all of us have a shadowy area. So I studied Jungian psychology professionally. That's what my PhD is in. And Jung posited this idea of the shadow. And it's really simple. It's what's outside of our vision, right? It's behind us. It's in the shadow. We literally can't see it. The stuff that's in our sexual shadow touches our sexual self. So it's all that stuff that feels like it's too much for you to look at, too much for you to take in. Maybe it's actions that you wish you could play out. Maybe it's fantasies that you have that you don't want to have. Maybe it's other people's lifestyles and being confused by them. Any number of things can hide in the sexual shadow. And when those things hide, we accidentally can cause injury to ourselves and our partners because we just don't even realize what's in there kicking us around. The unconscious is a powerful place. So when I talk about sexual shadow, I always want to introduce the idea that yours is unique to you. There's not a set of things that goes into a sexual shadow. There is instead, you could imagine a long bag that you drag behind you, and you've shoved some sexual ideas, some concepts, some actions. You've shoved them to that bag and you're dragging it behind you. It's still with you. You think you've gotten rid of them, or you think those images have left you, but in fact, there they are. Sometimes they haunt us loudly. Sometimes they're completely silent and just kicking around back there, kicking our butt behind us. And when we start to get to understand our sexual shadow, we can bring more of ourselves to our partners. That's the real trick. Understanding what's in your sexual shadow can bring you closer to your partner. That's the whole game.
You know, I love that imagery you used of the bag. I'm just thinking of like unconsciously carrying around this bag that's kind of weighing you down. So recently we went on a canoeing or a kayaking trip, right? And I had kids that I was dragging behind me. And like I was doing it was fine, but it was like kind of exhausting, right? And then as soon as they let go and they went and did something else, and I was just it was so much lighter, and I was moving
Yes.
through the water with so much more speed, and it just was so much easier for me, right? And so I think sometimes when we drop that dead weight, when we can look at it and see it for what it is, it just makes our life lighter and breezier and more enjoyable. So, with that being said, once now that we know what this bag is that we're carrying, this sexual shadow, how do we go about opening up that bag, looking into the shadow, and seeing what is actually really there?
There. Okay. So perfect question, because the sexual shadow can be really overwhelming. I like to encourage people to take it step by step. So you wouldn't just dump your bag out all at once, right? That's not really an effective way to put stuff away and get order going.
Right.
So instead, we want to unpack it in a way that feels safe and contained for us. The first thing that I ask people to do is start looking at your fantasies. So as a Jungian, I tend to have people talk about their dreams. And a lot of times people will say, I don't remember my dreams. You know, they happen. I know I dream, but I don't really remember them. And I say, okay, cool. Let's talk about your sexual fantasies. What do you masturbate to? And they're like, oh, I do know that. They don't necessarily want to share it right away, but we build trust and we start thinking about what is it that really lights me up? It's a little edgy. It brings me close to those feelings of full release, right? That stuff, whatever it is, whatever those images are, it's part of the shadowy area. We often know that it's there, but we're like, wow, how do I actually talk about that? How do I talk about it even for myself? And then how do I bring it to my partner? Like, is that even a safe thing to do? The trick is to start with a small thing, a thing that feels safest to you. And so notice here, I'm not saying go digging into the deep, dark, piney woods of this bag and say, okay, I'm going to pull out the thing I hate the most about it or the thing I'm most afraid of. No, start with something that's small, that maybe just has a little energy for you, but for some reason you find yourself hiding it. You're like, I don't know why I don't talk about this. I don't know why I can't share this with my partner. It does take some courage to face these things. Sometimes we have to face them with ourselves before we can even bring it to a partner. It really depends on where you are in your sexual communication. That's sort of another whole
Yeah.
realm, right?
Yeah, that's what I specialize in, how to start talking about these things. But do you suggest maybe starting with a journal entry or something that feels safer and before you go and start vocalizing it?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, the safest way is to either journal about it or to simply allow themselves to like meditate on it. And I don't mean like in a really deeply meditative way. Just allow yourself to think about it in a non-sexual time. So not a time when you're trying to get yourself off, a time when you're just like consciously going to call this to your imagination and say, okay, objectively, this is just a thing I find erotic.
Mhm.
It just is. And I'm going to not judge it in this moment and just sit with it. Okay. Most of us have sexual shadow because we were raised in a very sexually repressive culture. We were raised in a very sexually taboo culture. And most of us in families that also had big repressions and taboos. And yet, here we are in this world filled with sexual imagery. That tension, most of us don't allow ourselves to just sit in it for a little while. So, yeah, a journal entry or even just allowing yourself to be consciously aware of, oh, this is one of my things. I like this.
Mhm.
And give yourself permission. There is no fantasy that is causing harm. It's a fantasy. What our actions are after that could potentially be harmful. And hiding our fantasy from ourselves is not going to make it less likely for us to stay safe, right? So I'm always right at the edge with people. If we are really concerned that something is, well, let's use the P word, pathological. If we really think something's wrong with us or we're really worried about that, running in the other direction and hiding and denying it, even to ourselves, is not going to save anybody. So sitting with that.
Yeah.
letting it
And I
be.
think that's one of the reasons why that bag gets so heavy is because we keep trying to push it down, push it down, push it down. And it just makes that bag all the more heavier.
Exactly. So I used to run a CrossFit gym and I would teach people to back squat all the time. And I'm like, and there they'd be with their bar all loaded up and it's on their back and they'd be squatting down. And what are they doing? Pulling down on the bar too. So they're pulling the weight onto themselves every time. That's when you'll fail. That's when you will wind up unable to return to your standing spot. When we can lighten the load by simply allowing space and allowing ourselves to relax into, okay, these are fantasies.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. This is me. Then you get to the exciting spot where maybe you're ready to talk to your partner about it. And that is, complicated for sure. And more so for some couples than for others. But it's always possible to do something with it, even if that's just sitting with it for yourself or bringing it to a coach who can maybe help you discern whether this fantasy is problematic for you or not.
Mhm.
You might think it is, but it might not be.
Mhm.
So a little outside perspective on that can be very helpful.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing how that is. So, how can we begin to bring our sexual desires, maybe our fantasies to our partner without fear? Like,
Yeah.
where do we start with that?
Yeah. Okay. So when we're talking about sexual shadow, usually people have some stuff that's edgy to them. And I want to just say up front, like, there is no such thing as kink versus vanilla. Like, it's all relative. Like, the idea of like how dark your fantasy is or how big a deal it is to bring it to your partner, it, that's relative. It's relative to you and your partner, your relationship. So first off, if it feels edgy for you, then it's edgy. That's fine. So there's no judgment on that. That means anything could feel frightening. Any sexual fantasy or sexual act or any game you want to play, anything could potentially bring fear stuff up. Now, when fear comes up, we are not in our best frame of mind for communicating. So I like to reframe that and say, is this actually fear about bringing this to my partner? Or is this fear that I'm going to be judged by myself first? I'm going to judge me. So, again, if I can open up a little space to say, okay, in non judgment, I have this thing I like. What if my partner is just as loving and accepting as I am? And the second thing I ask people to do is say, having a fantasy and wanting to share it is not the same thing as wanting to act it out.
Mm. So,
So, yeah. So start those conversations with, I'd like to share this story with you. I'd like to talk about this. I'm not saying I want to do it. I'm saying this is present for me and it would bring me great joy to simply share that with you. And then we can negotiate. And there's a lot of work we can do around the negotiations around whether this is something we add to our conjoint fantasies or whether this is something that in fact is just sort of a clearing of the air and this remains yours. But if we lean into the fear and imagine it, it's going to get bigger and bigger. If we instead remember that our partner loves us and sex itself is not shameful, start to set down that shame long enough to remember that your partner and you made promises to each other to accept, to hold space for, to love. And then,
yeah.
yeah, invite them into that because it's a huge way to join yourselves, to really be vulnerable.
Well, and two, when you go back to the real definition of sexual intimacy, it's to be seen by another person, right?
Exactly.
I mean, I personally can attest to like the moment in our marriage where my husband and I felt safe enough to bring these things into our relationship, to start talking about like when we finally felt that safety and that trust where we could just say what we were thinking and feeling without the fear of judgment or that it's actually going to play out, but that we could just talk about it, in the bedroom while we're it just adds this new dynamic to a relationship that is undescribable. Like it just feels so good to be able to say the things that are on your mind, that are on your heart, that pop into your, mind when you're being intimate. Those things, it's just a beautiful addition to the relationship, that I think that you can't go as deep if you're constantly trying to guard these things and stuff them back into your bag.
And that's the thing. It is when we allow ourselves to imagine that our partner cannot tolerate this about us, we're building a bit of a wall. And years go by, and I don't know, in my first marriage, years, 17 years we were together. It wasn't until I was dismantling that relationship that I realized, oh, some of that was stuff we couldn't share in the bedroom. And
Mhm.
I thought we were very open, but I hadn't let myself be vulnerable. I hadn't really strategically done that. And now I've been with my current husband for 12 years, and the act of doing that, the act of allowing yourself to be seen in the bedroom, but even more so in your imagination, let your imagination be seen and find out what else opens up in your life. Every time those layers are pulled off, other layers, like all this junk that's been blocking you from your partner, can fall away.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that so much. And I have so many questions for you, and I want to dive deeper into this. So I am so grateful that we are going to do a podcast episode. So if you're not done listening to Dr. Jolie, you want to hear more, make sure you look for the podcast episode that we're doing together, as well as I just want to kind of wrap it up with something a little more personal. And I'm asking all of my presenters this question, but let's imagine that you wake up one day and you realize you've allowed life, kids, business, school, all the things that you do to take precedence over you and your partner, and you're feeling disconnected and in a rut. What would you personally do to rebuild the relationship, reignite the spark, and bring the fun back into your partnership?
This is a great question because I have been here. In fact, it's the way I open my book is by saying, oh, yeah, we're there. Everything, the wheels have come off. My secret sauce is to start with me. It's so common for us to point our fingers outward and ask somebody else to change that when I can start with me and follow my pleasure, the whole world is now my oyster. I could find any number of ways to reignite the spark if I follow my actual pleasure. So for me, I will dive into pleasure experiments. Where's my joy? I'll start experimenting. And I don't just mean sexual pleasure. I mean, every somatic experience, every sensation I could have, I'll go let myself feel them, enjoy the water on your skin, feel what it feels like to move your body again, and actually notice pleasure. And when I do that, every single time that has been the gateway to opening up between us again, because usually I've closed something down. And when I closed that down, it wasn't just between my partner and I, it was between me and myself. So if I open that up, now it's easy to show myself to him again. And from there, we can have a conversation about how we're not going to let this happen again. Because it's really easy to see this as and sort of be a weekend warrior with my relationship. Like, I'll show up big on Friday nights, and the whole rest of the week, I'm not. And that's, for me, that's the big rut. Like, we're still doing great week to week, but what about every day? So, yeah, for me, I would start with myself every single time.
Such great advice. Thank you so much for your time today. Tell the viewers where they can find you. Tell us the name of your book and how we can get a copy of that, all the good things.
Awesome. Well, people can find me by going to jolihamilton.com. That's Joli. Hamilton, like the musical, nice and easy. And you can grab my book on Amazon. It's titled Project Relationship, The Entrepreneur's Action Plan for Passionate, Sustainable Love. And it is short and to the point and just gets you into actively changing what you're doing rather than just playing out the same old story.
So good. Thank you again.
Thank you.
To learn more ways to deepen your intimacy and strengthen your relationship, make sure you watch this video next.